The hallway stretched like a marble canyon, cold and unyielding. Each step echoed against polished floors, bouncing off towering cream-colored walls that smelled faintly of disinfectant and a lingering trace of perfume. An invisible reminder that luxury here came with rules enforced with fear. And then came the scream. A piercing, desperate wail that cut through the silence like a siren, ricocheting off the corridor's smooth surfaces. "Please, Elise, please stop crying," Kesha whispered, bouncing the baby against her hip. Her voice was barely audible, drowned out by the shrill cries of her one-month-old daughter, whose tiny fists clenched and unclenched in frantic rhythm. Sweat beaded on Kesha's forehead, dripped into her eyes, and stung. She forced herself to blink, trying to will the baby into silence. But Elise's screams only escalated. A wild, unrestrained sound that made every nerve in Kesha's body jump. Other cleaners in the hallway froze. Their eyes darted nervously to the double doors at the far end, then quickly back at Kesha. Nobody dared intervene. Nobody dared speak. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, stepped closer, voice low but sharp, cutting through the chaos. "You need to control that child. Do you have any idea what kind of man?" Before she could finish, the double doors slammed open. The air seemed to crack, as if the mansion itself recognized the danger. 6 feet of pure, controlled violence filled the doorway. Tahian Choi. Every staff member froze. Tahian's black suit was perfect, his presence sharper than a knife. Neck and hand tattoos peeked out from beneath the cuffs, a silent declaration of the life he commanded. His jaw was tight, muscle twitching beneath pale skin, and his eyes dark, cold, merciless, swept across the hallway. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you are new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming video. "Who," he said softly, "is making that noise?" The voice was quiet, polished, deadly, yet it reverberated in the bones. Kesha felt her blood turn to ice. Elise's cries didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder. It's mine, sir," Kesha stammered, her knees threatening to buckle. "My daughter? I'm so sorry." Tahian took a single step forward. That one step made it feel as though the hallway had dropped 20 degrees. "Bring her here," he said, quietly, but with a weight that brooked no argument. Every instinct in Kesha screamed to run, to grab Elise and disappear into the shadows, never look back. But her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her trembling body down the corridor. She clutched her daughter tighter, each step an eternity. Other staff members scattered like frightened birds, leaving only Kesha and the child in the looming presence of the most feared man in the city's underground. She stopped 3 feet away. Elise's tiny body shook with every sob, her eyes wide with confusion. Kesha forced herself to meet Tahian's gaze, despite every fiber of her being screaming to look away. I'm sorry, sir," she whispered again. I'll leave right now." Tahian's eyes never wavered. "How old?" Kesha blinked, heart hammering. 11 months, sir." He studied the child, expression unreadable, silence stretched, heavy, and unbroken. Then, something happened that made Kesha's world tilt sideways. Tahian extended his hand. "Don't," Kesha breathed, instinctively stepping back. She doesn't like strangers. Not even," but Elise lifted her head, tiny eyes locking onto his. Her wails ceased mid-scream. She squirmed free from Kesha's arms, tiny hands reaching for Tahian with a trust that made Kesha's heart stop. "Let her go," Tahian said softly. Kesha's arms loosened, helplessly. The child, a baby who screamed at her own grandmother, who shrieked when the pediatrician touched her, threw herself into the arms of the man who, according to every rumor and whispered tale, had killed 17 people with his bare hands. The silence that followed was deafening. Tahian held Elise with a gentle firmness, one arm cradling her head, the other supporting her small body. Her tiny fists dug into his expensive suit jacket, her cheek pressed against his shoulder. For the first time, Kesha saw a crack in the mask of Seoul's most feared man, a flash of something almost human. "She's calm," he observed, voice oddly neutral. Kesha's mouth went dry. Her mind refused to process what she was seeing. "Sir, I don't understand." "She never?" Tahian's gaze returned to her, sharp, calculating, but a hint of curiosity flickered. "What's her name?" "Elise," Kesha replied softly. The baby's breathing was already slowing, tiny eyelids drooping as she nestled closer to the man who should have terrified her. Tahian adjusted her ever so slightly, ensuring she remained comfortable, almost reverently. Kesha could not breathe, could not think, could barely exist. Then, in a quiet, measured voice that held both authority and fascination, "Follow me." Kesha's legs moved automatically, carrying her down the corridor, baby in arms, into the lion's den. Every step was a gamble with fate. Why does a baby, terrified of everyone else, trust the man who killed 17 people? What does she see that nobody else can? Before we reveal what happens next, like this video if you think courage comes in unexpected forms. Long before the echoing screams in the marble hallways, long before a baby chose a man feared by the entire underground, Tahian Choi had built a world where every sound, every shadow, every heartbeat carried weight. Seoul City sprawled beneath him, a maze of glinting skyscrapers and dark alleys, the skyline a jagged crown of ambition and danger. By day, the streets throbbed with traffic, neon signs flickering in storefronts, the smell of roasted street meats mingling with gasoline and exhaust. By night, the same streets belonged to the whisper of knives sliding from sheaths, tires squealing around corners, and the low hum of helicopters patrolling from above. Tahian's mansion sat like a fortress atop one of the city's highest hills, its black iron gates looming, dotted with spikes that caught the moonlight. Inside, marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, reflecting the cold perfection of wealth built on fear. Hallways stretched endlessly, lined with rare artwork from every corner of the globe, original oil paintings, sculptures carved from jade, modern pieces worth more than a small country's GDP. Security cameras blinked red from every angle. A digital gaze that never blinked, never slept. It was a palace built on paradox, elegance and danger, refinement and brutality, control and chaos. Every element was calculated, every detail a statement. Tahian walked these halls daily with the precision of a surgeon, the awareness of a predator. His polished black Oxfords tapped against marble, a metronome for the rhythm of power. Neck tattoos peeked beneath the collars of tailored suits, ornate, winding, threatening. Hand tattoos traced his veins, declaring loyalty, territory, history. Imported cigars burned slowly in crystal ashtrays, the scent mixing with aged leather and the faint tang of gunmetal from the vault in the basement. He had risen quickly, unnervingly so, carving his empire from nothing but instinct, ruthlessness, and an almost supernatural understanding of human weakness. The city's underground didn't merely respect him, they feared him in the way one fears a storm that can't be predicted, only endured. Rival gangs learned early that negotiations with Tahian were not mere discussions, they were lessons in survival. A wrong look, a misstep, and your empire could crumble in minutes. The crime landscape in Seoul mirrored the pulse of major U.S. cities, Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, places where law enforcement, corruption, and gang hierarchies intertwined in complex, deadly patterns. The Italian Mafia, remnants of the Yakuza, African-American street crews, and corrupt business moguls all shared one thing in common. They knew Tahian controlled the rules. He brokered deals with a knife-edge balance. One wrong word, one subtle disrespect, and a life could end, quietly or spectacularly. Even at the height of his power, Tahian's attention to detail never wavered. He could read a man before the man knew himself. During negotiations, he observed the tilt of a head, the twitch of a lip, the nervous tap of a ring finger. It was in these minute details that power revealed itself, an underling overconfident in his authority, a rival trying too hard to appear calm, a businessman masking greed behind a polite smile. Tahian's eyes caught it all, catalogued it silently, like a predator cataloging the habits of prey. In his office, walls of mahogany and floors of dark walnut reflected authority as much as wealth. Original artwork hung just above bulletproof glass cases holding weapons that had never failed him. The air carried a subtle mixture of expensive cologne, smoked tobacco, and a metallic hint from gunpowder residue. Every step he took echoed with calculated precision. Every gesture deliberate. The faint sound of a ringtone, a Samsung, sleek and muted, would cut through the silence, signaling a call that could change the balance of power in the city within moments. Tahian's reputation was not built on myth but on fact. At 27, he had negotiated a truce between the Korean-American crews and the remnants of the Italian Mafia. preventing a full-scale war in the downtown district. At 29, he had orchestrated the downfall of a corrupt city councilor who tried to double-cross him, leaving the man bankrupt and exposed. Every move was deliberate, precise, and effective. Even within his mansion, the hierarchy was clear. Staff and underlings alike moved like a well-oiled machine. The butler, Miss Hang, carried the quiet discipline of someone who had survived far too long in dangerous environments. Seo Jun, his right-hand man, observed and acted with deadly precision, aware that the wrong decision could cost him everything. Every interaction, every command, every glance was calibrated to maintain dominance. Tahian himself was a study in contradiction. Cold and terrifying in public, yet meticulous, almost obsessive about the details of his empire. He enforced rules with the kind of quiet authority that left no room for challenge. Yet he could command loyalty with gestures as small as a nod or a fleeting smile. His empire's strength came not only from fear but from the efficiency and loyalty he inspired. The streets of Seoul whispered his name in fear, awe, and grudging respect. On the south side, crews kept their heads down when his black sedans glided past, tinted windows hiding the man who could dismantle a rival with a phone call. Downtown, businessmen on the riverfront carefully measured their words in negotiations, fully aware that Tahian's attention was more thorough than any audit, more precise than any contract. Even the mansion's interior reflected this duality of life, luxury that could soothe and danger that could kill. The scent of imported coffee mingled with steel. The polished floors reflected chandeliers as well as the watchful eyes of security cameras, and the faint hum of climate control masked the silent presence of armed guards positioned like statues in every corridor. Tahian's empire was a machine. Every gear, every lever, every participant had a purpose. The man at the center, a 6-foot tower of control and calculated violence, ensured that chaos always bent to his will. And yet, beneath this meticulous exterior, there existed a crack in the armor, a space that even the most calculated men could not predict. A space that would be revealed when a baby, terrified of everyone else, chose to trust him. Even the most meticulously built empires carry the weight of tension beneath the surface. Tahian Choi's was no different. The mansion's opulent marble floors, mahogany panels, priceless artwork, was mirrored by an intricate web of loyalties and rivalries beyond its walls. Outside, the city teetered between order and chaos. The South Side crews, the remnants of Korean-American gangs, Italian mafiosi who refused to fully relinquish their territory, and corrupt businessmen all orbiting Tahian's gravity, each weighing the cost of defiance. The first sign of cracks often came in the smallest gestures. A pause too long, a hand brushing nervously against a ring, a gaze that lingered a moment too long on Tahian's bodyguards. At a meeting in a dimly lit suite above one of the city's most exclusive clubs, the first of these subtle betrayals began to take shape. Tahian leaned back in his chair, the dim light from a low-hanging chandelier casting shadows across his sharply cut features. Seo Jun stood just behind him, silent, eyes scanning every corner. Across the room, a Yakuza liaison from the West Coast shifted in his seat, the sharp smell of tobacco trailing from his cigarette. His sleeve slid just enough to reveal tattoos creeping up his arm, dragons intertwined with sakura blossoms. So, the Yakuza began, voice low, measured. We appreciate the access you've granted us, but the last shipment was delayed by 3 days. This is unusual for someone of your reputation. Tahian's eyes remained calm, but a faint flicker of steel ran through his expression. He inhaled slowly, letting the faint scent of leather from the chair mix with cigar smoke that lingered from a crystal ashtray. 3 days, he said evenly, does not constitute failure. It constitutes adjustment. Circumstances change. You adapt, or you lose. The man's jaw tightened, but he dared not argue. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, voice dropping into a whisper. You understand, of course, delays cost money. Some of my associates are anxious. They expect compensation. Tahian's hand moved subtly, resting on the arm of the chair, his fingers tapping once a signal, imperceptible to all but his closest allies. Compensation for impatience is not a strategy, he replied. Do you want your business to prosper or merely survive? The room went silent. The Yakuza's eyes flicked to the others gathered there. A tech CEO from Silicon Valley, his bespoke suit tight over his shoulders, sweating slightly under the pressure, and two Korean-American gang underlings from the North District, arms folded, faces inscrutable. All three knew they were being measured. Every breath they took, every bead of sweat, every subtle hesitation catalogued for future leverage. "You're calm," the CEO finally said, voice clipped, trying to mask both fear and curiosity. "You've built an empire at 30. Most men would be arrogant, but you observe, calculate. You see everything, even the things no one admits." Tahian didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He simply regarded them as one might study a chessboard, considering which pieces could be sacrificed and which would serve the endgame. "I see the moves, yes," he said quietly, "but I also see the cost of each one, and I ensure it is paid in full. By someone." The subtle threat hung in the air. It was in the way he tilted his head slightly, in the faint tightening of his jaw, in the almost imperceptible shift of his weight against the chair. All at once, his rivals understood. He was calm, but he was deadly, and patience, when it ran out, would be exacting. Outside the room, in the shadowed corridors of the mansion, a different kind of power struggle unfolded. One of Tahian's own underlings, a younger man named Dae-hyun, sat in the corner of a security office, headphones on, watching camera feeds. His knuckles were white on the mouse, eyes flicking between monitors. He envied Tahian's position, the control, the fear and respect that preceded him wherever he walked. And yet, in the same breath, he feared the man entirely. Dae-hyun's mind raced. A missed shipment here, a misdirected deal there, small opportunities, each one a chance to test Tahian's resolve. Could he be challenged? Could he be overthrown? Would loyalty crumble under pressure, like glass? The idea was intoxicating and terrifying. Back in the suite, the Yakuza shifted again, exhaling smoke. His translator whispered a question about future operations. Tahian's attention never wavered. Every muscle, every micro-expression, calibrated to detect deception. When the man lowered his gaze to avoid eye contact, it was logged in Tahian's silent ledger. By the time the meeting concluded, the Yakuza knew something the CEO did not. Tahian understood their ambition before it even fully formed. The CEO, meanwhile, had noticed the subtle but telling things. The tension between the North District crew, the Yakuza's cautious glances, the faint twitch in Tahian's left eye when he catalogued discrepancies. It was enough to make him nervous, enough to understand that wealth alone did not grant security, not in Tahian's world. After the meeting, the underlings followed him silently back to the mansion. They were careful, wary, each footstep on polished marble echoing as a reminder of the hierarchy. In the mansion's hallways, Tahian's voice drifted behind them, low, instructive, yet tinged with an authority that brooked no dissent. Every action has consequence. Every hesitation is observed. Never forget what happens when a man ignores the truth before him. The tension among the rivals simmered like magma beneath a cracked crust. In the alleyways of Seoul's districts, whispers of discontent began to circulate. Dae-hyun spoke carefully to his cohorts, planting seeds of doubt, asking leading questions about loyalty, about leadership, about whether Tahian's empire was built on respect or fear alone. And yet, every action they took, every plan they whispered behind closed doors, was catalogued. Every missed payment, every nervous glance, every subtle disrespect, a ledger only Tahian could read. In this world, paranoia was not paranoia, it was survival. And ambition, unchecked, was a gamble. Few survived. By the end of the night, the mansion was silent again. Tahian sat alone in his office, overlooking the glittering skyline. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes, and he allowed himself the briefest moment of reflection. Rivals tested him, underlings tested him. The world tried, endlessly, to destabilize him. And yet, his empire remained, not because he was untouchable, but because he saw the world differently, observed it fully, anticipated it entirely, and moved accordingly. Still, even the greatest empires have weak points, and sometimes, those weak points do not come from enemies or underlings, they come from a single, unexpected source. A vulnerability no contract, no threat, no gun, could prepare a man for. The baby, Elise, a mere 11 months old, had walked straight into the heart of an empire built on fear. And in doing so, She had exposed the one thing even Tahian could not calculate, the unpredictable force of trust, innocence, and instinct. The mansion never truly slept. Even at midnight, when the chandeliers were dimmed and the guards paced silently along the hallways, it felt alive, breathing, watching, listening. Kesha had long since learned that every step she took, every creak of the floorboard, every whispered sigh, could echo farther than she imagined. Yet nothing had prepared her for the feeling that night, a subtle shift in the air, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her heart pound like a drum in her chest. Elise slept in her crib, tucked under a soft blanket, yet Kesha could not stop glancing toward the baby monitor. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant clatter of water pipes, even the soft whirring of the air conditioning, everything sounded amplified, unnatural, threatening. She rubbed her eyes and tried to tell herself it was exhaustion, that adrenaline kept her keyed up after the day with Tahian. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. In the study upstairs, Tahian Choi leaned against the desk, eyes scanning the city lights outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. But his attention was elsewhere. Seo Jun had just left with a stack of security reports. Tahian's fingers drummed lightly on the polished mahogany, a signal of internal calculation. He had felt it, an almost imperceptible tremor in the routine, a subtle misalignment in the otherwise flawless execution of his empire. He did not speak. He did not need to. The mansion's quiet gave him all the clues he needed. Footsteps that lingered a beat too long outside the main hall. A missed phone call that should have been answered immediately. The soft click of a door closing somewhere it had no reason to. Tahian's instincts, honed over years of navigating treachery, were telling him something was wrong. The storm was coming, and this time, it might reach the heart of his home. Kesha moved cautiously down the hallway, carrying a tray of water to Elise's room. Each footstep felt amplified against the marble, each creak threatening to announce her presence. The baby stirred, tiny fists clenching, eyes fluttering open. "Shh, it's okay," Kesha whispered, more to steady herself than to soothe her daughter. The mansion's silence pressed down on her like a living thing, and she could feel the weight of the space around her, the shadows, the paintings, the reflective glass that seemed to watch her. Tahian entered the nursery without a sound, like a shadow stepping out of darkness. Kesha froze. Elise shifted in her crib, sensing his presence, but did not cry. That alone was a subtle reminder. Tahian moved in a world where trust was measured in survival. He approached the crib and crouched down, eyes sweeping over the room, noting every detail, the slightly misaligned books on the shelf, the faint smudge on the window, the way the blanket had been tucked too tightly over Elise's tiny shoulders. "You're tense," he said quietly. Not a question, but an observation. "I just worry," Kesha admitted, forcing a smile she did not feel. "About everything." Tahian's lips pressed together. "Everything is relative. You worry about what is important. You ignore the rest." He reached out, adjusting the blanket, his fingers brushing the soft skin of Elise's cheek. And yet, even in a house like this, danger comes from where you least expect it. Outside, the faint shuffle of movement caught Kesha's attention. A security guard passing in the hallway. But there was something off. His gait was hesitant, not confident. Tahian noticed it too. A shadow of distrust flickered in his dark eyes. He did not move, did not speak. Instead, he catalogued it, measured it, stored it. Every hesitation, every subtle misstep became a data point in his mind. The clock ticked, slow, deliberate. Kesha sat on the edge of the crib, clutching Elise, her own pulse loud in her ears. Tahian watched her, but his gaze was elsewhere, on the hallways, on the city beyond, on invisible threads he could sense stretching between people, anticipating betrayal. He had learned long ago that in the world he ruled, paranoia was not paranoia, it was survival. The tension built gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. A phone buzzed silently on a marble counter missed call. A door clicked somewhere in the distance, not enough to be alarming, but enough to set nerves on edge. Kesha flinched at every sound. The nursery suddenly too small, too enclosed, too vulnerable. Tahian stepped closer, low voice cutting through the quiet. "Do you feel it?" I don't know what you mean," Kesha said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. "Something is off. It always is when people are planning against you." His eyes were dark, scanning, calculating. It is not always obvious. It is not always loud. Sometimes it is in the spaces between words, the pause before action. Kesha swallowed hard. Should I be afraid? You should be aware, he said, evenly. Fear without awareness is useless. Awareness without action is fatal. He crouched slightly, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence, the subtle scent of leather and cologne, the faint tang of metal from the hidden weapons he always carried. But you, his gaze softened, just a fraction. You are learning. That is more important than fear. Survival comes from knowing where to look. She nodded, heart hammering. Elise stirred again, tiny fingers curling around Kesha's necklace, sensing her mother's tension. Tahian observed silently, noting the child's instincts, the way the baby mirrored her mother's unease yet remained calm in his presence. That small, trust, innocent, instinctive, was a reminder of what was at stake, the vulnerability of even the most controlled environments. The mansion's walls seemed to close in. Every echo, every shadow, every flicker of movement was a signal. Tahian's hands rested lightly on the crib, his mind moving 1,000 steps ahead, predicting threats, calculating responses, storing contingencies. The city outside, the gangs, the business rivals, they were all pieces on his chessboard. But now the stakes were higher. Inside his home, the unpredictable force of a child, a single mistake, a single hesitation, could cascade into chaos. Kesha's eyes met his. This story, it's long and dark. I don't know if I can handle it. Tahian's lips curved faintly, a ghost of amusement, though his eyes remained hard. It is not meant to be easy, but it is necessary. Tell me, Kesha, what time is it where you are watching this? Her pulse caught. A strange question, but one that pulled her attention outward, anchoring her in the moment. It's 12:17 a.m., she whispered. Good, he said. Remember it. Time marks events, and events mark survival. Awareness of both is your only defense. The tension remained, coiling tight in every hallway, every room. Kesha clutched Elise close, noting how even the baby's presence altered the mansion's rhythm, softened edges that otherwise radiated control and danger. Tahian remained vigilant, the ever-present storm behind the calm eyes. But even he knew. Cracks were forming, subtle, dangerous, and when they manifested, there would be no warning, only consequence. The marble hallway seemed endless, stretching out like a gauntlet lined with the ghosts of every whispered rumor about Tahian Choi. Kesha's heart hammered in her chest, a staccato that threatened to drown out the cries of her daughter. Elise's wails ricocheted off the polished floors, a high-pitched alarm that made every shadow seem closer, every corner darker. Please, Elise, Kesha whispered, rocking her gently against her hip. Her palms were slick with sweat. Shh, shh, Mama's here. It's okay. Mama's? Her voice broke as the head housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, snapped sharply from the corridor. Do you have any idea what kind of man? Before she could finish, the double doors at the end of the hall swung open with a force that seemed to suck the air from the room. Silence fell immediately, broken only by Elise's desperate cries. Tahian Choi stood there, a storm-given flesh, 6 feet of controlled danger wrapped in an immaculate black suit. The scar along his cheekbone caught the faint light, a jagged reminder of battles fought and survived. His dark eyes swept across the staff like a predator cataloging prey. Who, he said quietly, the words carrying weight far heavier than volume, is making that noise? Kesha's stomach dropped. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to clutch Elise and vanish into the labyrinthine corridors. But her feet moved anyway, carrying her forward, each step heavier than the last. It's mine, sir, she whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling like a leaf in a storm. My daughter, I'm so sorry. Tahian's gaze shifted to Elise. The baby's tiny fists were balled, her face scrunched red and furious, completely oblivious to the danger surrounding her. Tahian took one deliberate step forward. The air seemed to freeze, the temperature dropping as if the hallway itself recognized the presence of its master. Bring her here, he said. Kesha froze. Sir, she doesn't like strangers, she stammered. Not even my mother. She'll scream. Tahian's hand extended, palm open, a silent offering. Do not interfere. Something inside Kesha wavered. Elise's wails softened slightly, tiny eyes peeking from beneath Kesha's shoulder. And then, it happened. The baby shifted, her head lifting from Kesha's shoulder. She blinked once, then twice, and for the first time in months, her gaze locked onto Tahian's face. And then her tiny hands reached out, instinctively, almost desperately. She scrambled from Kesha's arms, crawling lunging toward the man who had killed 17 people by his own hand. "No!" Kesha cried, panic shredding her throat. She reached for her daughter, but Elise had already wrapped her small arms around Tahian's neck. Her cheek pressed against his shoulder, her body relaxed completely, utterly trusting. The hallway was silent. Staff members froze in place, unsure if they should intervene, unsure if they were witnessing a miracle or a trap. Tahian stood perfectly still for a long moment, the weight of the infant in his arms contrasting sharply with the reputation of the monster he was supposed to be. He inhaled slowly, a flicker of something almost human passing over his face. Shock, perhaps. Recognition, maybe. Or perhaps just curiosity at the incongruity, innocence unafraid. "She's calm," he observed, voice low, almost neutral, but carrying a gravity that made Kesha shiver. I don't understand," Kesha whispered, barely able to meet his gaze. She never does this. Tahian's eyes never left the child. "Her name?" "Elise," Kesha said softly, voice trembling. He adjusted his hold, supporting her more securely without disturbing her fragile sleepiness. The baby nestled into the crook of his arm as if she had belonged there all along. Kesha's chest tightened. Every rational thought she had about danger, about Tahian's violent reputation, about her own survival instincts, collided with the undeniable reality. Elise trusted him. "Sir," Mrs. Chun's voice cracked from the hallway. "Your meeting. Bususan representatives. Waiting?" Tahian's eyes lifted, glinting dangerously. "Reschedule it. Immediately." His voice was calm, precise, but carried the weight of absolute authority. Kesha could hardly breathe. The man who had struck fear into the hearts of everyone in Seoul, who controlled empires built on loyalty and fear, stood here holding her daughter with a tenderness she had never imagined. "Follow me," he said quietly, turning toward his office. Kesha's steps were automatic, carrying her through the double doors into a space that could only be described as a fortress of wealth and influence. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like a stage set. Mahogany furniture gleamed under soft lighting. A bulletproof glass case in the corner displayed weapons like artifacts in a museum. Tahian settled Elise on the desk with delicate precision, careful not to wake her. Kesha sat, wide-eyed, unable to process what she was witnessing. "Explain to me," he said softly, voice cutting through the tension, "why you thought bringing an infant into my home was acceptable." Kesha swallowed, voice shaking. "The nanny had a family emergency. I couldn't find anyone else. I needed the job, sir. I didn't want her to be alone. Please understand." Tahian studied her. His dark eyes were unreadable, cataloging every detail. The subtle tremble in her hands, the way she shifted when Elise stirred, the honesty etched into her expression. "You're not afraid of me," he said quietly. Kesha faltered. "I'm terrified, but more terrified of being homeless with her." A shadow of a smile flickered on his lips. Honesty. Interesting. He looked down at Elise, who had begun to stir, tiny fingers curling around his suit lapel. "She trusts you," Kesha said softly. "She's never trusted anyone like this." Tahian nodded slightly, barely perceptible. "She sees something others do not. Something I suspect you might understand as well." The room settled into a strange silence. Kesha watched, fascinated and horrified in equal measure, as this man, Seoul's most feared crime lord, adjusted Elise in his arms with care, softening in ways that seemed almost impossible. The baby's soft breath, the warmth of her skin against the fabric of his suit, the trust in her tiny hands, seemed to chip at the edges of his otherwise impenetrable demeanor. Finally, Tahian's voice broke the quiet. "May I have her back?" Kesha's hands tightened reflexively around Elise, but she could not explain the strange calm in the way he looked at her daughter. She's calm," she admitted. I don't know why." Tahian's lips pressed together. "Because some things cannot be taught. Trust, instinct, it chooses." He returned the baby to Kesha with infinite care, their fingers brushing briefly. A spark, subtle but undeniable, passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of something deeper, something neither could yet name. Kesha cradled Elise close, voice trembling. Drop a comment if you think something deeper is happening here. She whispered aloud, unsure if she meant to the baby, to Tahian, or to the audience beyond the walls of the mansion. Tahian straightened, mask of authority back in place, but the edges softened imperceptibly. For the first time, perhaps, someone outside his world had made him pause, not because of fear, not because of strategy, but because of a tiny life that refused to recognize monsters, only the human within them. Kesha could hardly breathe as she followed Tahian through the double doors into the mansion's private elevator. The walls gleamed black, reflective like obsidian, and the soft hum of the mechanism beneath her feet reminded her that every inch of this place was designed to intimidate or to impress, depending on the observer. Elise, cradled safely in her arms, remained unusually calm, her tiny hands occasionally curling around Kesha's finger. Your apartment, Tahian said, his voice soft but carrying that weight that demanded obedience, is above the garage. It's vacant, fully furnished. You and Elise move in tomorrow. Childcare provided on site. Standard business hours, $15 million per month. Kesha froze. Her mind scrambled. $15 million per month. Her fingers tightened around Elise. Sir, I can't. You can, and you will, Tahian interrupted, his tone leaving no room for debate. There was a flicker in his dark eyes, almost imperceptible, a shadow of acknowledgement that he understood what this gesture meant. Security, not charity. Considerate payment for something your daughter reminded me of. What's that? Kesha asked cautiously, her curiosity mingled with disbelief. Tahian looked down at Elise, still curled in her arms, soft and trusting, and spoke almost in a whisper. Not everyone sees a monster when they look at me. Kesha blinked. That single sentence reshaped everything she thought she knew about the man who had terrorized the city and everyone around it. The next morning arrived too quickly. Kesha, dressed in the only professional outfit she owned, a black dress, modest and slightly worn from secondhand purchase, twisted her hair into a neat bun, and applied makeup with precision. She tried to convince herself she belonged here. She failed spectacularly. You look terrified, Seo Jun remarked when he arrived at precisely 8 a.m., tablet and sleek black phone in hand. Normal. Everyone's terrified at first. Kesha adjusted Elise on her hip. When does this stop? She asked quietly. It doesn't. You just get better at hiding it, Seo Jun replied, his tone matter-of-fact, eyes briefly softening as he observed the baby. The boss arranged for a nanny, 10 minutes, former intelligence officer, trained in child safety and security. She'll be safer than the president's kids. Kesha's throat tightened. Why is he doing all this? Seo Jun shrugged subtly. He doesn't explain himself. But I've worked for him 8 years and never seen him react to anyone the way he reacted to your daughter yesterday. Whatever she did, shook something in him. The doorbell rang. In less than 5 minutes, Miss Hang, a woman in her 50s with precise posture and eyes that seemed to miss nothing, stepped inside. Elise immediately recognized her, giggling and reaching out, the sound of her laughter bright and carefree. She's precious, Miss Hang said warmly, accepting the toddler without hesitation. We'll have a wonderful day. Don't worry. Kesha exhaled, shoulders sagging for the first time in hours. She usually doesn't. I know, Seo Jun said, but children sense energy, and right now, your baby feels safe here. That's what matters. Once Elise was in safe hands, Kesha followed Tahian into his office. The room, bathed in morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, was intimidating in a way she could feel in her bones. Tahian stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Korean. A call concluded, and his eyes found hers. Wait, he said, holding up a single finger. Kesha waited. Every fiber of her body screamed tension. If those shipments aren't in Bususan by Friday, he said into the phone, tone dropping to something lethal, I'll personally ensure you regret it. A pause. Then, excellent. He ended the call and turned fully to Kesha, scanning her appearance in one quick, professional glance. You look nervous. I am, sir, she admitted, hands clasped, trying to appear calm. Stop calling me sir when we're alone, he corrected. Tahian is fine. Kesha's eyes widened, a shiver running down her spine. Something intimate, dangerous, and yet disarming, hung in the air. Today, we have 4 meetings, he said, gesturing to the sleek black chairs. 2 with legitimate business partners. Two with people who would kill me if they could. You observe, take notes, watch body language. Tell me afterward what you notice. Analyze people? She asked, incredulous. Your daughter saw something in me yesterday that no one else sees. I'm curious if you inherited the same instinct. The first meeting began with a tech CEO, sharply dressed, polished, but uneasy. He kept glancing at Kesha as if she were a lit fuse. Tahian negotiated a partnership deal worth billions without raising his voice once. Every pause, every inflection, every carefully chosen word made the room tense. A predator stalking in plain sight. Afterward, Tahian turned to Kesha. What did you notice? The CEO. She hesitated. He's afraid of you, but respectful, cautious, watching, maybe waiting for an opening. Tahian's dark eyes flicked. Good. And the Yakuza? The next visitor was older, arms covered in tattoos, presence unmistakable. The conversation flowed between Korean and Japanese, calm but brimming with lethal potential. Tahian's demeanor hardened, voice lower, colder, sharper. Kesha felt a shiver run down her spine. The man left, leaving a faint scent of cigarette smoke and leather. What did you notice? Tahian asked. The CEO kept studying me, trying to read our connection, she said. The Yakuza boss. He didn't even glance. He already knew I was irrelevant to the negotiation, but his hand kept touching his ring, a nervous tell. Planning something. Tahian leaned back, studying her with a flicker of new interest. You're observant. I have to be, she said quietly. Single mother. Survival depends on it. He nodded, not saying more, but there was a silent acknowledgement in his posture, a measure of respect, subtle, unspoken. By 2 p.m., Kesha's mind was overloaded, but Tahian's voice was calm. We're done for the day. Go check on Elise. Already? She asked, astonished. You did more than I expected. Go be with your daughter, he said, and Kesha realized he wasn't commanding, he was testing her judgment. At the door, he called her back. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not running. Most people would have. But you stayed. And your daughter, she didn't see a monster. She saw me. Something else. Trust. Instinct. Courage. Yes. Kesha swallowed, understanding finally dawning. She had stepped from survival into strategy, from fear into observation. And Elise had been the bridge, in that strange, terrifying world of wealth, influence, and danger. Her baby had been the key. The morning sunlight cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Tahian Choi's office, sharp and unrelenting. Kesha was adjusting Elise on her hip, trying to keep the baby calm, when the tranquility shattered in an instant. The window exploded first. Glass rained down like shards of ice, sparkling in the sun but slicing skin and fabric with merciless precision. The world slowed for a fraction of a second as shards suspended mid-air before chaos overtook every sense. Gunfire erupted, rapid, sharp, and relentless. Kesha screamed, instinctively pulling Elise close, pressing her tiny body against her own. The sound of bullets hitting marble, wood, and metal echoed like thunder in the mansion, each ping punctuating a heartbeat she could feel in her throat. Stay down. Tahian's voice cut through the cacophony, calm but laced with authority that made her freeze in place. His body was already moving, a predator in motion, sliding across the polished floor like liquid shadow. More gunfire, shouted Seojun, crouched near the corner, rifle raised, scanning the windows and doorways. Cars screeching outside. Kim's men, they're not leaving. Kesha's chest tightened, adrenaline pumping so hard she felt it in her teeth. She crawled instinctively, following the path Tahian outlined with gestures that required no words. Her palms burned from contact with broken glass, knees stinging as they scraped against the polished marble. Elise whimpered softly, but Kesha clutched her tighter, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mama's here. Mama's got you." Tahian moved with a precision that seemed almost inhuman, one arm shielding her as he retrieved his weapon from a sleek holster, the other scanning, calculating trajectories, counting rounds, anticipating each move of the attackers outside. His presence was both terrifying and reassuring, a dark wall of protection that no bullet dared breach. "Huang, secure the baby," Tahian barked over the gunfire. His voice was low, but every syllable carried the weight of command. "They're coming inside," Seojun yelled, ducking behind the desk as a bullet tore through the polished surface, splintering wood like it was paper. Kesha's eyes darted around the office. Every reflection in the glass, every shadow in the corners, seemed to hold death. Her heart hammered so violently it drowned out all other sound. She realized with chilling clarity, if Tahian fell here, everything she had built, everything she had fought for would shatter in seconds. "Listen to me very carefully," Tahian said, dropping his voice just enough to cut through the fear. He grabbed Kesha's face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You're going to crawl to that door. You're going to run to your apartment. You're going to lock yourself and Elise in the panic room. The code is 0815. Do you understand?" Her throat constricted. "What about you?" she asked, terror thick in her voice. "I'll handle this," he said, almost a whisper, but the menace behind it was palpable. "Now, move. Go." Glass sliced her palms again as Kesha crawled. Elise's soft weight pressed against her chest. Bullets thudded into the walls around them, the metallic ping ringing in her ears. Outside, the roar of engines and gunfire created a storm of sound that threatened to overwhelm every rational thought. Behind her, she heard Tahian's voice drop into something not quite human, a low, guttural tone that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "You just made the last mistake of your lives." The mansion had become a living entity of danger, every hallway a trap, every shadow a potential death sentence. Kesha's fingers fumbled at the panic room door, slamming the code into the keypad. The steel walls slid into place with a heavy thunk, echoing like a heartbeat in the confined space. Elise whimpered, but Kesha held her close, rocking her gently. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "Mama's here. Mama's got you." Minutes, or was it hours, passed in suffocating silence, broken only by the distant echo of gunfire and the low rumble of engines. Kesha's mind raced. She replayed Tahian's instructions over and over, clinging to the words that separated life from death. Then, the sound of the door unlocking. A silhouette appeared, tall, broad, unmistakable. Tahian stood there, blood splattered on his suit, a deep gash cutting across his cheek, yet alive. His presence filled the panic room before the door fully opened, radiating the same calm, terrifying authority he had in the office. "You're safe," he said, voice steady. Not a question, a statement, one that demanded recognition of the miracle she had witnessed. Kesha's knees nearly buckled. Are you okay?" she whispered, barely daring to breathe. Tahian crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling both her and Elise into his arms. The weight of his body against hers was firm, grounding, yet trembling slightly with the residual adrenaline. He held them, shaking imperceptibly, a predator softened by the need to protect rather than destroy. "I'm sorry," he breathed, voice catching in a way that seemed almost alien. "I'm so sorry. This is my world, my danger. You shouldn't." "Stop," Kesha cut in, voice trembling. "We're okay. You protected us." "No, Kim did," he said, his expression darkening. "And I'm guessing Kim's not a problem anymore." Tahian's jaw tightened, eyes flicking down to Elise. The baby, unbothered by the chaos, reached up instinctively to touch the cut on his cheek. Her tiny fingers pressed against the wound, and the sound that followed her first word made Kesha's blood run cold. "Oh, Elise said clearly. Tahian froze. Shock and something else, an emotion Kesha couldn't name, crossed his face. Kesha gasped. "Her first word?" Elise repeated, patting his face gently, almost proudly. "Oh, The tension in the room, the violence that had saturated every second, seemed to evaporate in that moment. Tahian pulled Elise close, closing his eyes. "I'm okay, little one. I'm okay." Watching them, Kesha understood something fundamental. Elise had never seen a monster. She had seen someone who could be saved. Someone who needed protection as much as they did. And Tahian had just proved that even in a world of power and violence, trust could emerge in the smallest, most unexpected forms. He looked at her, voice soft, almost fragile. "Stay, both of you. Let me protect you. Let me be something other than a monster." Kesha's hand found his, gripping tightly. "You already are," she said. Elise giggled, patting both their faces. "Oh, she announced again, as if confirming the fragile peace they had achieved. For the first time, the mansion's walls no longer felt like a cage. They felt like a fortress, not against her, But for her, and for Elise, the chaos had ended as abruptly as it had begun. Silence replaced the gunfire, and the mansion smelled of smoke, gunpowder, and something metallic that clawed at the back of Kesha's throat. Glass crunched underfoot as she carried Elise toward the apartment, her arms trembling with exhaustion, adrenaline still coursing like liquid fire through her veins. Tahian followed close behind, his suit torn and spattered with blood, some his, some others. His movements were precise, deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if each step was a measured proof that he could survive anything and keep them safe. Yet now, there was an edge to him, a weariness that hadn't existed in the office or the boardroom. They reached the apartment in what felt like a single, drawn-out heartbeat. Kesha fumbled with the keys, hands slick with blood and sweat. Elise nuzzled against her shoulder, quiet for the first time since dawn. Tahian held the door open, silent, his gaze scanning the dim interior, ensuring nothing had followed them. "Safe," he said finally, voice low, almost a whisper, as if confirming the reality for himself as much as for her. Kesha exhaled shakily. Yes, we're safe." Elise stirred against her chest, tiny fists flexing, but she didn't cry. Instead, her large, curious eyes blinked up at Tahian. The baby's gaze lingered on him, studying the jagged scar on his cheek, the subtle tension in his jaw, and the dark intensity in his eyes. Then, she did something Kesha never expected. She stretched one tiny hand toward him. "Oh," Kesha whispered, her voice catching in her throat. Her first word? Elise's lips moved slowly, deliberately, forming syllables with surprising clarity. "Oh." "We." Tahian froze, a flicker of shock crossing his face, quickly masked by the usual calm. But Kesha saw it. Just for a second, something raw, unguarded, human, passed across his features. He blinked down at Elise, then back at Kesha. She said something," Kesha murmured, almost afraid to breathe. Tahian crouched slightly, careful not to jar his wounded body, and held out a hand. Elise reached for him immediately, crawling toward the familiar weight and warmth. Her tiny hands pressed against his cheek, feeling the rough edges of dried blood, the texture of scarred skin. "You trust me," he said, voice low, almost questioning, not commanding, curious, vulnerable. Kesha's chest tightened. She trusts you like no one else. She's never done that before." For the first time, Tahian allowed himself to smile, faint and fragile, like a crack of sunlight through storm clouds. "Maybe there's something in her. Something she sees in me that others don't." Kesha swallowed hard, the reality of it all settling over her like a heavy cloak. This man, this feared Mafia boss, had shown her a side of himself that no one in Seoul's criminal underworld ever glimpsed. Tenderness, patience, protectiveness. It was terrifying and comforting all at once. "You need to rest," she said, gently guiding him toward the leather sofa. The material smelled faintly of gunmetal and cologne, a reminder of the violence that had just erupted. "You're hurt. We can clean the wounds here. It's safer." Tahian nodded, allowing her to lead him, but he remained alert, scanning every corner, every reflection, even while she tended to him. His fingers were strong but careful, curling around hers as she cleaned the cuts on his cheek and hands, a silent reassurance that she hadn't crossed a line in the delicate balance of life and death. "Elise," Kesha said softly, nudging the baby toward him. The child giggled, tiny hands clutching at the fabric of his torn suit. "She wants you to see her." Tahian held her close, feeling the warmth of her small body against the cold fabric of his suit. Her tiny fists patted his chest, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. And for the first time, Kesha saw him exhale not a measured breath of control, but a real, human release. Her trust. "It changes everything," he murmured. More to himself than to anyone else. Kesha couldn't help but study him. Here was the man who had negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, controlled entire neighborhoods through fear and influence, orchestrated assassinations with surgical precision. Yet, in this moment, he was simply a man holding a child. And the child's faith had broken something through the armor he had built around himself. "She saved you too," Kesha said quietly. Her voice shook, a mixture of relief and awe. "You protected her, and in turn, she protected you from everything else." Tahian's eyes softened, almost imperceptibly, as he looked down at Elise. The baby's small hands traced the lines of his jaw, the scar that ran like a lightning bolt across his cheek, and her laughter, light, innocent, untainted, echoed in the apartment like a bomb on the raw tension still clinging to the walls. You're remarkable, he said finally, voice catching. Not just her, but you too. You carried her through this, and you didn't break, not once. Kesha shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. I thought I'd lose everything today. I thought. She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Words felt meaningless against the magnitude of what had just happened. Tahian reached out, placing a hand over hers. Strong, steady, grounding. You didn't. You held on. That matters more than you know. A silence settled over the room, thick and heavy, but not oppressive. It was the kind of silence that comes after storms, the aftermath of chaos when the world holds its breath and allows you a moment to exist without danger. Elise shifted in his arms, tiny head tilting toward Kesha, as if to bridge the space between them all. You saved him, Kesha whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Tahian's gaze met hers. No, she saved me. Her innocence, her trust. It reminded me of what I've lost, of what I might still be capable of, if I allow it. Kesha's throat tightened. Do you ever feel like you're beyond redemption? He chuckled softly, a dark, gravelly sound that somehow held warmth. I thought so once. Until today. Until this. He gestured to Elise, then back to Kesha, encompassing both of them, in a silent declaration. Maybe redemption isn't about changing the past. Maybe it's about who we allow ourselves to be in moments like this. If you mutter, Elise, sensing the calm, cooed, and reached for Kesha's face, patting her cheek with tiny hands. Oh, she said again, as if reaffirming the fragile peace they had all survived. Kesha laughed, a sound of relief that felt almost foreign after hours of fear. Yes. Oh, all of us, together. Tahian's eyes lingered on her, unreadable and intense. Stay, he said softly, voice breaking the pattern of authority it usually carried. Stay. Let me protect you. Let me be human here, for once. Kesha reached out, taking his hand. You already are, she said. Elise giggled, patting both their faces, as if sealing the moment with a declaration of trust and belonging. And for the first time, Kesha allowed herself to believe it. That the man who ruled with fear could also love, that the baby who had chosen him could see the good hidden beneath the darkness, and that, perhaps, she too could find a place in that world, without fear. 6 months had passed since the chaos of gunfire, blood, and shattered glass. The mansion, once a fortress of tension and fear, had softened under the rhythm of daily life, laughter, and the tiny footsteps of an 11-month-old who had somehow tamed Seoul's most dangerous man. The morning sun spilled across the expansive garden, glinting off the meticulously trimmed hedges and reflecting on the marble fountain at the center. Birds chirped without a hint of concern, as if the world outside had no idea what transpired within these walls 6 months ago. Elise ran barefoot across the dew-slick grass, her tiny pigtails bouncing with each frantic sprint. Catch me if you can, she squealed, a sound so pure it would have made any hardened heart falter. Tahian, dressed in casual jeans and a simple gray shirt, crouched low, arms outstretched, a rare, unguarded smile splitting his face. I've got you, little tornado, he said, his voice a mixture of amusement and careful calculation instincts honed over decades, still alive, even in play. Elise lunged forward with wild abandon, giggling uncontrollably. Tahian scooped her into his arms effortlessly, spinning her around before setting her down with exaggerated care. Her laughter rang out like a bell, echoing across the garden, mixing with the faint scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass. Kesha stood nearby, her hands on her hips, watching. The lines of fear that had once defined her posture were gone, replaced by confidence and ease. Her black dress, now paired with practical flats, suggested she was ready for anything, be it a sudden meeting with a rival or keeping up with a toddler hell-bent on speed records. You're spoiling her, Kesha said, her tone playful, though her eyes softened as she watched her daughter dart back toward Tahian. That's my job, Tahian replied, voice calm, almost tender. He bent down, letting Elise climb onto his back. And you, Kesha, keeping up with both of us? That's your job too. Kesha laughed, shaking her head. Doesn't exactly say that on my employment contract, but I'll take it. For a brief moment, the past, the violence, the betrayals, the nights of fear, felt suspended, replaced by ordinary, almost mundane joy. It was extraordinary in its normality. A child's laughter, a woman's relief, a man allowing himself to exist outside the empire he commanded. The mansion itself seemed to mirror the change. Marble corridors, once echoing with footsteps of tense staff and concealed guards, were now filled with the subtle hum of domestic life. Soft chatter, Elise's tiny feet, and the distant clink of coffee cups from the kitchen. Security remained tight, but the danger was muted, a shadow behind the light of routine and family bonds. Inside the apartment above the garage, the previous austerity had softened. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, highlighting the warm tones of the wooden floors and the corners decorated with toys and child-sized furniture. Elise's crib, once an unfamiliar space, now bore the marks of her curiosity and activity. Every object seemed to tell a story of her growth, and every story intertwined with the slow transformation of Tahian and Kesha's lives. Tahian sat on the sofa, reviewing documents for an upcoming legitimate business meeting, yet his focus kept drifting toward Elise, who was now experimenting with stacking blocks on the rug. Kesha joined him, adjusting her tablet as she updated his schedule and filtered messages with meticulous care. The dynamic between them was fluid, professional, yet softened by the unspoken understanding that Elise's well-being came first. "You're remarkably patient with her," Kesha observed, voice quiet but filled with genuine admiration. Tahian glanced at her, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "She's persistent. Reminds me of someone I know," he replied, voice low, almost teasing. Yet in his eyes, a flicker of something unguarded, lingered softness, respect. Maybe even something like warmth. Kesha shook her head, smiling. "It's easier to deal with her than some of your business partners, I imagine." He chuckled, the sound rich and rare, unburdened by menace. "That's fair." Elise wobbled toward them, a block in one hand, her tiny brows furrowed in concentration. "Build," she demanded, pointing toward the scattered toys. Tahian shifted slightly, extending a hand to steady her as she climbed onto his lap. "All right, little architect, let's see what we can do." His fingers, skilled at calculated precision in boardrooms and back alleys, moved delicately as he helped her stack blocks, turning play into an exercise in trust and cooperation. Kesha watched them, struck by the intimacy of the moment. This was the man who had once instilled terror across neighborhoods, whose name commanded loyalty and fear alike. Yet here he was, patient, careful, even gentle. Elise's laughter filled the space, a soundtrack that had softened the shadows in ways nothing else could. The evolution of their bonds was subtle but profound. Tahian, once a man defined by control and intimidation, allowed himself to be vulnerable not recklessly, but in measured doses that reflected trust earned through shared danger. Kesha, hardened by her own trials and responsibilities, now operated with quiet confidence, balancing care for her child and understanding the inner workings of a criminal empire without being consumed by fear. Elise, the catalyst, thrived in this balance, shaping and being shaped by the adults around her. Later, as the afternoon sun waned and cast long, golden streaks across the garden, Tahian walked with Elise perched lightly on his shoulders, Kesha trailing behind. The simple act of walking together, child giggling, father smiling, mother observing, felt revolutionary in the context of their lives. The laughter was defiance, a small rebellion against the darkness that had once defined them. In these moments, the cultural impact of Tahian's choices became clear. The man who had ruled with fear now ruled with nuanced humanity. His reputation remained formidable, but beneath it lay a new dimension: redemption, trust, and connection. Staff members, initially terrified, now moved with cautious respect, tempered by glimpses of his softer side. Rivals still feared him, but even they had to reckon with the humanity he displayed in his private world, a paradox that made him unpredictable in ways that strengthened his empire rather than weakened it. Even the city itself seemed to respond. Whispers spread of the feared Korean-American mob leader who, through the unlikely bond of a child, had transformed from a figure of pure intimidation to one capable of loyalty, protection, and restraint. In an urban landscape where power often equaled ruthlessness, Tahan had found influence through trust, subtlety, and human connection. As the day turned to dusk, Tahan, Kesha, and Elise paused in the garden, silhouettes against the fading light. Elise's small hand found Tahan's, and he bent to meet her gaze. "You see, little one," he said, voice soft, almost reverent, "even monsters can change. Sometimes it takes someone who believes in you to remind you who you are." Elise giggled, pressing her cheek against his, as if sealing the lesson in her own language of trust. Kesha smiled, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of fear and uncertainty lift, replaced by clarity and a rare sense of safety. Tahan's eyes swept over both of them, scanning for threats. Yes, but also appreciating the calm, the ordinary, the light that had begun to exist in a world that had always demanded darkness. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that protection and power didn't always have to come at the cost of humanity.